Melinda, a compassionate waitress known for her keen eye and caring nature, never imagined that a routine shift at the diner would lead her into a terrifying situation. One evening, as she served a family, something deeply unsettling began to unfold before her eyes. A quiet 10-year-old boy named Isaiah, sitting with his younger sister and parents, seemed strangely detached, bruises marking his body. But when Melinda discreetly reached out to him, what she discovered would leave her heart racing and change this family's fate forever. What terrifying truth had Isaiah been hiding in silence? And how did Melinda's quick thinking unravel a shocking family secret? Stay tuned to find out. But before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if Melinda's story of courage and compassion resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The Sunrise Diner sat nestled on the corner of Maple and Oak, its faded red awning a familiar sight to locals. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. Melinda, a waitress in her mid-30s with kind eyes and a quick smile, wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that morning. She'd been working at the diner for over a decade and knew every regular by name. As the bell above the door chimed, Melinda looked up to see a family of 4 entering. "Welcome to Sunrise Diner," she called out cheerfully, grabbing a handful of menus. "Table for 4? The man, tall with close-cropped brown hair, nodded curtly. "Yes, please," he said, his voice carrying a hint of impatience. Melinda led them to a booth by the window, taking in the group as they walked. The woman, beautiful with deep brown skin and tight curls pulled back into a bun, offered a small smile. Behind them trailed 2 children, a boy who looked about 10 and a younger girl, maybe 8. "Here we are," Melinda said, setting the menus on the table. "Can I start you off with some drinks?" The man spoke before anyone else could. "Coffee for me, water for my wife. The kids will have orange juice." He barely glanced at his family as he spoke. Melinda's smile faltered for just a moment. There was something off about the way he spoke, the way the others remained silent. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on being professional. "Coming right up. I'll give you a few minutes with the menus." As she turned to get their drinks, Melinda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her gut. She'd seen all kinds of families come through the diner, but something about this one set off alarm bells. The children hadn't made a sound, hadn't even looked up from the table. It wasn't the usual excited chatter of kids picking out pancakes or arguing over who got the last piece of bacon. Returning with their drinks, Melinda set them down carefully. "Here we go. Are we ready to order, or do you need a few more minutes?" The man, Brad, she'd heard his wife call him quietly, spoke again. "We're ready. I'll have the steak and eggs, medium rare. My wife will have the veggie omelet." He turned to the kids. "Isaiah, Layla, what do you want?" The boy, Isaiah, mumbled something about pancakes while Layla just shrugged. Brad sighed, clearly annoyed. 2 orders of pancakes, then. And be quick about it." Melinda jotted down the order, her pen hovering over the pad. "Would the kids like any sides with that? We've got great hash browns, or maybe some fresh fruit." Brad waved his hand dismissively. "No, just the pancakes. That'll be all." As Melinda turned to put in the order, she caught a glimpse of Isaiah's wrist. A dark bruise peeked out from under his long-sleeved shirt. Her heart skipped a beat. It could be nothing, she told herself. Kids got bruises all the time, right? But combined with their silence, their father's controlling behavior, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Melinda kept a watchful eye on the family. Brad dominated the conversation, barely letting his wife Janelle get a word in edgewise. At one point, Layla dropped something, and as she bent to retrieve it, her dress rode up slightly. Melinda's breath caught in her throat as she saw another bruise, angry and purple, on the little girl's leg. The tension at the table was palpable. Melinda noticed Layla shrinking away from her father, pressing herself against the wall of the booth. Isaiah kept his eyes fixed on the table, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself as small as possible. Melinda's mind raced as she put in the order. She needed to find a way to interact with the children, to give them an opportunity to reach out if they needed help. But how could she do that with Brad watching their every move? An idea struck her as she was preparing their drinks. She grabbed a handful of crayons and a few paper placemats with games and puzzles printed on them. It wasn't much, but it might give her an opening. Returning to the table, Melinda set down the placemats and crayons. "I thought the kids might like something to do while they wait for their food," she said brightly. "We got some fun games on these placemats. Word searches, mazes, that sort of thing." Brad's jaw tightened, but he didn't object. Melinda saw a flicker of interest in Isaiah's eyes as he reached for a crayon. "Oh, and there's a really tricky word search on the back," Melinda added, leaning down as if to point it out. As she did, she slipped a small folded note under Isaiah's placemat, praying Brad wouldn't notice. "I'm sure they can figure it out on their own," Brad said, his tone clipped. "No need to hover." Melinda straightened up, nodding. "Of course. I'll be back to check on you in a bit." As she walked away, Melinda's heart pounded. She'd taken a risk with that note, but she couldn't shake the feeling that these children were in danger. She busied herself with other tables, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the family. After a few minutes, she saw Isaiah shift in his seat, his hand moving under the placemat. A moment later, his eyes met hers across the diner. It was brief, just a fraction of a second, but in that look Melinda saw fear, desperation, and a silent cry for help. The boy gave an almost imperceptible nod, and Melinda's heart sank. That tiny gesture carried the weight of unspoken horrors. She retreated to the kitchen, her thoughts racing. She had to call for help, but she couldn't leave the family unattended for too long without raising suspicion. In the relative privacy of the kitchen, Melinda pulled out her cell phone with shaking hands. She dialed 911, her voice barely above a whisper as the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? Melinda took a deep breath. "I'm a waitress at the Sunrise Diner on Maple Street. There's a family here. I think the children are being abused. I've seen bruises, and the boy confirmed he needs help when I passed him a note." The operator's voice was calm and professional. "Can you describe the family?" Melinda quickly relayed the details. Brad's controlling behavior, Janelle's fearful demeanor, the children's ages and appearances. She mentioned the bruises she'd seen and Isaiah's limp. "Okay, ma'am. We're dispatching officers to your location now. Can you safely keep the family there until they arrive?" "I think so," Melinda replied. "Their food isn't ready yet. I'll do my best to stall them." "All right. The officers should be there within 10 minutes. Stay calm and don't do anything to put yourself in danger. If the situation escalates before they arrive, call us back immediately." Melinda ended the call, her heart racing. 10 minutes. She had to keep the family here for 10 minutes without raising Brad's suspicions. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. She made her way back to the family's table, a forced smile plastered on her face. She'd done it. She called the police. Now came the hardest part, keeping the family here until help arrived. "I'm so sorry about the wait," Melinda said, her voice light despite the tension coursing through her body. "Our chef is having some trouble with the stove this morning. But I have good news. To make up for the delay, we'd like to offer you all complimentary dessert." Brad's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his features. "We don't need dessert. We need our food so we can leave." Melinda nodded sympathetically, her mind scrambling for another delay tactic. "Of course, I understand. Let me just check on your order one more time. In the meantime, how about some more coffee?" She reached for Brad's mug, deliberately moving slowly. As she poured, she noticed Brad checking his watch, his jaw clenching in frustration. Janelle sat rigidly in her seat, her eyes darting nervously between her husband and children. Isaiah and Layla remained silent, heads bowed over their barely touched placemats. "You know what?" Melinda said brightly, setting down the coffee pot. "While we're waiting, how about I show the kids our new ice cream sundae bar? It's right over there, and they can build their own sundaes for free." For a moment, she saw a flicker of interest in the children's eyes. But Brad's hand came down hard on the table, making everyone jump. "No," he growled. "We're not here for ice cream. We're here for breakfast, which we still haven't gotten." "What kind of service is this?" Melinda took a step back, her heart pounding. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll go check on your order right away." As she hurried towards the kitchen, Melinda glanced at the clock. Only 5 minutes had passed since she called 911. It felt like an eternity. She peeked out the window, hoping to see a police car pulling up, but the street remained frustratingly empty. Back in the kitchen, Melinda took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She couldn't keep stalling forever. Eventually, she'd have to bring out their food. But every minute she could keep them here increased the chances of the police arriving in time. With shaking hands, Melinda began preparing a tray of water glasses. She'd bring these out first, another small delay tactic. As she arranged the glasses, she overheard Brad's raised voice from the dining room. "This is ridiculous. We should just leave." Melinda's blood ran cold. She hurried back out, the tray of water glasses clutched tightly in her hands. "Here we are," she said, forcing cheer into her voice as she approached the table. "Some fresh water while you wait. And good news. Your food should be ready any minute now." Brad glared at her, his face flushed with anger. "It better be. We've been waiting for over half an hour." Melinda nodded apologetically, her eyes darting to the diner's entrance. Still no sign of the police. The tension at the table was palpable. Janelle sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. Isaiah had shrunk further into his seat, while Layla pressed herself against her mother's side. "Is there anything else I can get for you while you wait?" Melinda asked, desperate to keep them engaged. Before Brad could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Melinda's heart leapt as she saw two men enter the diner. They were dressed in plain clothes, but something about their bearing screamed police. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. This was it. Trying to keep her voice steady, Melinda turned back to the family. "I'll just go check on your order one last time. It should be out any second now." As she walked away from the table, Melinda caught the eye of one of the officers. She gave a slight nod towards Brad's table, then hurried into the kitchen. Her hands shook as she leaned against the counter, taking deep breaths. It was out of her hands now. From her vantage point in the kitchen, Melinda watched as the officers approached the table. One of them spoke to Brad, his voice low but authoritative. "Excuse me, sir. We'd like to have a word with you outside, if you don't mind." Brad's face contorted with a mixture of confusion and anger. "What? Why? We haven't done anything wrong." The officer remained calm. "It's just a routine check, sir. It won't take long." For a moment, Brad hesitated. His eyes darted around the diner, as if looking for an escape route. Then, with a growl of frustration, he stood up. "Fine. Let's get this over with." As Brad followed one of the officers outside, the other stayed behind, his attention focused on Janelle and the children. Melinda watched as he crouched down, speaking softly to Isaiah and Layla. Unable to stand by any longer, Melinda emerged from the kitchen. She approached the table cautiously, not wanting to intrude, but needing to offer whatever support she could. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer looked up at her, his eyes kind but professional. "Ma'am, are you the one who called us?" Melinda nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for your vigilance," the officer said. "We're going to need to ask you a few questions later, if that's all right." "Of course," Melinda replied. She turned her attention to Janelle and the children. "Is there anything I can get for you? Some water, maybe?" Janelle nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Water would be nice, thank you." As Melinda went to fetch fresh glasses of water, she could hear raised voices from outside. Brad's angry shouts carried through the diner's thin walls, making everyone inside flinch. When she returned with the water, the atmosphere at the table had shifted. Isaiah, who had been silent and withdrawn all morning, was now speaking softly to the officer. Tears streamed down his face as he recounted a story that made Melinda's heart break. He hits Layla," Isaiah whispered, his voice trembling, "when she cries or makes too much noise. He says it's to teach her to be quiet, but it's not right. I try to protect her, but then he hurts me too." The officer nodded encouragingly, his voice gentle as he asked, "How long has this been happening?" Isaiah asked. The boy shrugged, looking down at his hands. "For as long as I can remember. He says if we tell anyone, he'll hurt Mom. So we have to be quiet and pretend everything's okay." Layla, who had been clinging to Janelle, spoke up in a tiny voice. "He pushed me down the stairs last week. That's why my leg hurts." Janelle let out a choked sob, pulling both children close. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her words muffled against their hair. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better." The officer's face was a mask of professional calm, but Melinda could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. He turned to Janelle, his voice gentle but firm. "Ma'am, Has your husband been abusive towards you as well? Janelle hesitated, her eyes darting towards the door where Brad's muffled shouts could still be heard. Then, slowly, she nodded. For years, she admitted, her voice barely audible. At first, it was just verbal. He put me down, control what I wore, who I talked to. Then it got physical. I was too scared to leave. He said he'd kill us all if I ever tried to take the kids away. Melinda felt tears rolling down her cheeks as she listened to Janelle's confession. How long had this family been suffering in silence? How many times had they come to this very diner, putting on a brave face while hiding such terrible pain? Just then, the door burst open. Brad stormed in, his face red with fury. The officer who had been questioning him followed close behind, his hand hovering near his hip where Melinda assumed a weapon was concealed. What the hell is going on here? Brad roared, his eyes wild as he took in the scene at the table. What have you been telling them? Isaiah and Layla shrank back, terror etched on their young faces. Janelle stood up, placing herself between Brad and the children. It's over, Brad, she said, her voice shaking but determined. We're not going to be silent anymore. Brad's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, his hand raised as if to strike Janelle. But before he could make contact, the two officers moved with lightning speed. In a matter of seconds, they had Brad pinned against the wall, his arms wrenched behind his back. Bradley Thompson, you're under arrest for suspicion of child abuse and domestic violence, one officer stated, his voice firm as he began reciting Miranda rights. Brad struggled against the officer's grip, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. This is ridiculous. You can't do this to me. That waitress is lying. She's making all of this up. Melinda felt a chill run down her spine as Brad's wild eyes locked onto her. For a moment, she saw the full force of his rage directed at her, and she understood the terror this family had lived with for so long. But then Isaiah's small voice cut through the chaos. He's lying, the boy said, his words quiet but clear. Melinda didn't make anything up. She helped us. She saw that we needed help when no one else did. A hush fell over the diner as Brad's struggle ceased. He seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him as the reality of the situation sank in. Without another word, the officers led him out of the restaurant, the click of handcuffs echoing in the sudden silence. As the door closed behind them, Janelle sank back in her seat, pulling Isaiah and Layla close. The three of them clung to each other, a tangle of arms and tears, and whispered words of comfort. Melinda stood frozen, overwhelmed by the intensity of what had just transpired. Part of her wanted to rush to the family, to offer whatever comfort or support she could. But she held back, recognizing that they needed this moment to themselves. The remaining officer approached Melinda, his voice low. You did a brave thing today, ma'am. Your actions may well have saved this family's lives. Melinda nodded, unable to find words to express the tumult of emotions coursing through her. She watched as a social worker entered the diner, making her way to the family's table. The woman spoke softly to Janelle and the children, explaining what would happen next. As the social worker helped the family gather their things, Janelle suddenly looked up, her eyes seeking out Melinda. Without a word, she crossed the diner and pulled Melinda into a tight embrace. Thank you, Janelle whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you for seeing us, for helping us when we couldn't help ourselves. Melinda returned the hug, her own tears falling freely now. You're so strong, she murmured. All of you. I'm just glad I could help. As Janelle pulled away, Isaiah and Layla approached. The boy looked up at Melinda, a small, tentative smile on his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. You're our hero, he said simply. Layla nodded in agreement, reaching out to take Melinda's hand. Thank you for saving us from the monster, she whispered. Melinda crouched down, bringing herself to eye level with the children. You're the real heroes, she told them, her voice filled with warmth and admiration. You were so brave to speak up. Things might be a little scary and different for a while, but I promise you it's going to get better. As the family was led out of the diner, Melinda felt a profound mix of emotions washing over her. Relief that the children were safe, sorrow for the pain they had endured, and a fierce determination to remain vigilant in the future. The diner felt eerily quiet in the aftermath of the morning's events. Melinda moved through the space in a daze, mechanically clearing tables and wiping down counters. Her mind kept replaying the scenes she had witnessed: Brad's rage, the children's fear, Janelle's quiet strength. As she picked up a fallen crayon from under the family's table, Melinda paused. On the edge of Isaiah's placemat, partially hidden by scribbles, were two words written in a child's unsteady hand: "Thank you." Tears pricked at Melinda's eyes as she carefully folded the placemat and tucked it into her apron pocket. It was a reminder of why she had acted, why she had taken the risk of getting involved. The rest of Melinda's shift passed in a blur. She gave her statement to the police, recounting every detail she could remember from both encounters with the family. Her manager, visibly shaken by the day's events, told her to take the rest of the week off with pay. As Melinda hung up her apron at the end of her shift, she felt changed. The world looked the same as it had yesterday, but everything felt different. She'd always considered herself an observant person, but today had opened her eyes to the hidden struggles that might be playing out all around her. Walking to her car, Melinda took a deep breath of the cool evening air. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: she'd be ready. Ready to notice, ready to act, ready to be the helping hand that could change a life. The sun was setting as Melinda drove home, casting long shadows across the streets. But for the first time in days, her heart felt light. She'd made a difference today, and tomorrow, she'd wake up ready to do it all over again, one small act of kindness at a time. As she pulled in her driveway, Melinda's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made her heart swell. "This is Janelle. The police gave me your number. I just wanted to say thank you again. We're safe now, staying with my sister. The kid's already seeming happier. You've given us a chance at a new life. We'll never forget what you did for us." Melinda sat in her car for a long moment, reading and rereading the message. Tears of relief and joy streamed down her face. She had trusted her instincts, taken a risk, and it had paid off in the most profound way possible. As she finally made her way into her house, Melinda felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her job as a waitress had always been about more than just serving food. It was about connecting with people, brightening their day in small ways. Now, she realized it could be so much more. She could be a lifeline, a safe haven for those who couldn't speak up for themselves. Melinda made a silent vow as she prepared for bed that night. She would keep her eyes open, stay vigilant. If there was even a chance she could help another child, another family in crisis, she would do whatever it took. The events of the day replayed in her mind as she drifted off to sleep. The fear in Isaiah's eyes when they first came in, the tension radiating from Janelle, the barely contained rage in Brad's voice. But those images were overshadowed by the memory of Isaiah's small smile as he called her a hero, of Layla's tiny hand in hers, of Janelle's grateful embrace. In her dreams that night, Melinda saw a diner filled with light. Children laughed and played, free from fear. Parents smiled, their shoulders unburdened by hidden pain. And in every booth, on every table, were small folded notes that simply read, "Thank you for seeing us." The weeks following that fateful day at the Sunrise Diner passed in a blur for Melinda. She found herself thrust into a whirlwind of police statements, court appearances, and media attention. The local news had picked up the story, praising her quick thinking and bravery. Overnight, she had become something of a local hero, a title that sat uncomfortably on her shoulders. "I just did what anyone would do," she'd say whenever someone brought it up, deflecting the praise with a small smile and a shrug. But deep down, Melinda knew it wasn't that simple. She had seen what others had missed, had acted when others might have turned away, and that knowledge changed her, altered the way she moved through the world. As she returned to work at the diner, Melinda found herself hyper-aware of every customer who walked through the door. She studied their faces, their body language, the way they interacted with each other. Every family that came in sparked a flicker of concern. Were they okay? Were there signs she was missing? "You can't save everyone, honey," her manager Rita told her one slow afternoon, catching Melinda staring intently at a mother and son in the corner booth. "You'll drive yourself crazy if you try." Melinda nodded, knowing Rita was right. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been given a gift, the ability to see beyond the surface, to recognize the signs of pain and fear that others might overlook. It was a responsibility she couldn't ignore. One rainy Tuesday, about a month after the incident, Melinda was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized the woman who entered. Janelle stood in the doorway, looking both nervous and determined. She was alone, her eyes scanning the diner until they landed on Melinda. A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth as she made her way to the counter. "Hi," Janelle said softly, sliding onto a stool. "I hope it's okay that I came by." Melinda felt a rush of emotions: relief, joy, concern. "Of course it's okay," she said warmly, reaching out to squeeze Janelle's hand. "It's so good to see you. How are you? How are the kids?" Janelle's smile grew more confident. We're doing better. It's been hard, but we're getting there. The kids are in therapy, and so am I. We're staying with my sister for now, trying to figure out our next steps." As Janelle spoke, Melinda studied her face. The fear and tension that had been etched into her features that day were gone, replaced by a cautious hope. She looked younger, somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I'm so glad to hear that," Melinda said, her voice thick with emotion. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Something to eat?" Janelle shook her head. "No, thank you. I actually came here because I wanted to thank you again, and to ask for your help." Melinda's eyebrows raised in surprise. "My help? Of course, anything. What do you need?" Janelle took a deep breath, her fingers tracing patterns on the countertop. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how you were able to see what was going on with us when no one else did. And I realized there must be others out there, other families like ours, suffering in silence, not knowing how to ask for help." She looked up, meeting Melinda's gaze with a fierce determination. "I want to do something about it. I want to start a support group, maybe even a small nonprofit, to help victims of domestic violence. To teach people the signs to look out for, like you did. But I don't know where to start. I thought maybe you could help me." Melinda felt a surge of admiration for the woman before her. Just a month ago, Janelle had been trapped in a nightmare, unable to see a way out. Now here she was, ready to turn her pain into purpose, to help others who were still living the life she had escaped. "Janelle, that's amazing," Melinda said, her voice filled with warmth and encouragement. "Of course I'll help. We can start right now if you'd like. Let me just grab my notebook, and we can brainstorm some ideas." As Melinda hurried to the back to retrieve her things, her mind was already racing with possibilities. She thought of all the resources she'd researched in the weeks since the incident, the hotlines and shelters she'd familiarized herself with. She thought of the other waitresses and restaurant staff she knew, how they could form a network of vigilant eyes and helping hands across the city. When she returned, Janelle was sitting up straighter, a look of determination on her face. Melinda pulled up a stool on her side of the counter, spreading out her notebook between them. "Okay," Melinda said, pen poised over the paper. "Let's start at the beginning. What do you envision for this group?" As Janelle began to speak, her words coming faster and more confidently, Melinda felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This, she realized, was why she had acted that day. Not just to save one family, but to create a ripple effect of hope and healing that could spread far beyond the walls of the Sunrise Diner. For the next few hours, Melinda and Janelle pored over ideas, sketching out plans and making lists. They were so engrossed in their work that they barely noticed as the diner filled up with the dinner crowd, the buzz of conversation rising around them. "We could call it Silent No More," Janelle suggested, her eyes bright with excitement. "And maybe we could have different programs. One for women looking to leave abusive situations, one for children who've experienced trauma, and one to educate the public on recognizing signs of abuse." Melinda nodded enthusiastically, jotting down notes. "That's brilliant, Janelle. And what if we partnered with local businesses? We could do training sessions for employees, wait staff, hairdressers, anyone who interacts with the public regularly. Teach them what to look out for, how to offer help safely." As they talked, Melinda felt a growing sense of purpose. This was bigger than her, bigger than Janelle or Isaiah or Layla. This was about creating a safety net for their entire community, a web of awareness and support that could catch those who were falling through the cracks. The bell above the door chimed again, and Melinda glanced up out of habit. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the two people who entered, Isaiah and Layla, accompanied by a woman who must have been Janelle's sister. Janelle followed Melinda's gaze, her face lighting up at the sight of her children. "Oh, I didn't realize it had gotten so late. My sister must have brought them by after their therapy session." Melinda watched as the children spotted their mother. Their faces broke into wide smiles, so different from the fearful, withdrawn expressions she remembered from that day. Isaiah said something to his aunt, then began making his way towards the counter, Layla trailing close behind. "Mom," Isaiah called out, his voice carrying a note of excitement that tugged at Melinda's heart. "Guess what? I got an A on my math test today." Janelle turned to her children, her face radiant with pride and love. "That's wonderful, sweetie. I'm so proud of you." As Isaiah reached the counter, his eyes landed on Melinda. For a moment, he hesitated, shyness overtaking his excitement. But then, to Melinda's surprise, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice muffled against her apron. "For saving us?" Melinda felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as she returned the hug. "You're very welcome, Isaiah. But you know what? You saved yourselves. You were so brave to speak up, to tell the truth. You're the real hero here." Isaiah pulled back, a small, proud smile on his face. Layla, who had been hanging back, now stepped forward. She didn't say anything, but she slipped her small hand into Melinda's, squeezing it tightly. Janelle watched the interaction with tears in her eyes. "This is why we need to do this," she said softly to Melinda, "so that every child can feel this safe, this loved." Melinda nodded, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. She looked at the family before her, Janelle, standing tall and confident, Isaiah, his eyes bright with the promise of a future without fear, Layla, no longer shrinking from the world but reaching out to connect. They had been through so much, had suffered in ways Melinda could only imagine. But here they were, not just surviving, but thriving, planning to help others, to turn their pain into purpose. In that moment, Melinda knew with absolute certainty that she had found her calling. This wasn't just about being a vigilant waitress or a good Samaritan. This was about being part of something bigger, about creating a community where no one had to suffer in silence, where help was always within reach. As the family settled into a booth, Janelle waving Melinda over to join them, Melinda felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had always loved her job at the diner, had always felt that serving others was her way of making the world a little bit better. But now, she realized she had the opportunity to serve in a much deeper, more meaningful way. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Melinda and Janelle threw themselves into bringing their vision for Silent No More to life. They started small, with weekly support group meetings in the community center. Melinda was amazed at how quickly word spread, how many people came forward once they knew there was a safe space to share their stories. They partnered with local shelters and domestic violence organizations, building a network of resources and support. Melinda used her connections in the service industry to set up training sessions, teaching bartenders, hairdressers, and fellow waitstaff how to recognize signs of abuse and offer help discreetly. One crisp autumn evening, about 6 months after that fateful day in the diner, Melinda stood at the podium in the town hall, looking out over a sea of familiar and new faces. It was the official launch event for Silent No More, and the turnout was beyond anything she could have imagined. "When I first noticed something was wrong that day in the diner," Melinda began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach, "I didn't know what to do. I was scared, uncertain, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. And that decision changed not just my life, but the lives of a family who had been suffering for far too long." She paused, her eyes finding Janelle in the crowd. Janelle nodded encouragingly, her eyes shining with pride and determination. "But the story doesn't end there," Melinda continued. "Because that family, instead of retreating into the shadows, chose to stand up and say no more. They chose to turn their pain into purpose, to reach out and help others who are still trapped in the cycle of abuse and fear." As Melinda spoke, she saw heads nodding in the audience. She saw tears on some faces, looks of recognition and understanding on others. She saw people reaching out to squeeze their neighbors' hands, offering silent support and solidarity. "That's why we're here tonight," Melinda said, her voice growing stronger. "To say that we will be silent no more. That we will open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to those who are suffering. That we will create a community where everyone feels safe, valued, and heard." The applause that followed was thunderous. As Melinda stepped back from the podium, making way for Janelle to speak, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought that family into her diner that day. Gratitude for the courage it had taken to act, to speak up, to get involved. Gratitude for the opportunity to be part of something so much bigger than herself. As the event wound down, Melinda found herself surrounded by well-wishers and volunteers eager to get involved. She answered questions, handed out flyers, and exchanged contact information, her heart swelling with each new connection made. "Melinda," a small voice said, cutting through the chatter around her. Melinda turned to find Layla standing there, looking up at her with wide, serious eyes. "Hi, sweetheart," Melinda said warmly, crouching down to the girl's level. "What do you think of all this?" Layla was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I want to help too. I want to make sure no other kids have to be scared like I was." Melinda felt her heart constrict at the child's words. She reached out, gently taking Layla's hands in hers. "That's very brave of you, Layla. And you know what? You're already helping. By being here, by sharing your story, you're showing other kids that there's hope, that things can get better." Layla's face lit up with a smile, a far cry from the fearful, withdrawn child Melinda had first met. "Really? Really?" Melinda confirmed. "You're a hero, Layla. Don't ever forget that." As Layla skipped off to rejoin her family, Melinda straightened up, her eyes scanning the crowded room. She saw survivors sharing their stories, volunteers signing up for training sessions, community leaders pledging their support. She saw hope, determination, and a fierce commitment to change. As she made her way back to Janelle and the kids, ready to celebrate the successful launch of their organization, Melinda felt a sense of peace settle over her. She couldn't change the whole world, couldn't save everyone, but she could make a difference in her corner of it. She could keep her eyes open, her heart ready to act. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start a ripple of change that could spread far beyond the walls of the Sunrise Diner. As the months passed, Melinda found herself settling into a new rhythm. Her days at the diner took on a dual purpose, serving food and keeping watch. She developed a keen eye for the subtle signs of distress, the silent pleas for help that often went unnoticed. But more than that, she became a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. Word spread quickly about the waitress who had saved a family from abuse, and about the organization she had helped found. People began to seek her out, not just for coffee and pancakes, but for a listening ear, a word of advice, or simply a moment of understanding. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as the lunch rush was winding down, Melinda noticed a young woman sitting alone in a corner booth. She had been there for over an hour, nursing a single cup of coffee, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. Something about her demeanor set off alarm bells in Melinda's mind. Approaching the table, Melinda offered a gentle smile. "Can I get you anything else, hon? Maybe a slice of pie? It's on the house." The woman looked up, startled, as if she had forgotten where she was. "Oh no, thank you. I should probably go. I've been here too long." "Nonsense," Melinda said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You stay as long as you need." "I'm Melinda, by the way." "Sarah," the woman replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I've heard about you, about what you did for that family." Melinda felt her heart rate quicken. "Is that why you're here, Sarah? Do you need help?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "He says he'll kill me if I leave. But I can't. I can't live like this anymore." For the next hour, as Rita covered her tables without complaint, Melinda sat with Sarah. She listened to her story, offered words of support and encouragement, and most importantly, helped her develop a plan. By the time Sarah left the diner, she had the number for a local shelter, a safety plan in place, and a flickering spark of hope in her eyes. As Melinda watched Sarah walk out into the rain, her heart heavy but determined, she realized that this was just the beginning. The ripples from that first act of intervention were spreading, touching lives she might never even know about. That evening, after her shift ended, Melinda made her way to the community center for the weekly Silent No More support group meeting. As she entered the room, she was struck once again by the diversity of the group. Men and women of all ages and backgrounds, united by their shared experiences and their determination to break the cycle of abuse. Janelle was already there, setting up chairs in a circle. She looked up as Melinda entered, her face breaking into a warm smile. "There you are. I was hoping you'd make it. We have a new member joining us today." Melinda helped Janelle finish setting up, her mind drifting to Sarah. She hoped the young woman would find the strength to seek help, to take those first difficult steps towards freedom. As the room began to fill with familiar faces and new ones, Melinda felt a surge of pride and determination. This was what it was all about, creating a space where secrets could be spoken, where shame could be shed, where healing could begin. As the meeting got underway, Melinda found herself drawn to a teenage girl sitting quietly in the corner. She couldn't have been more than 16, her posture hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. With a pang, Melinda was reminded of Layla on that first day in the diner. After the meeting, as people mingled and chatted over coffee and cookies, Melinda made her way over to the girl. "Hi there," she said softly, crouching down to meet the girl's eyes. "I'm Melinda. I'm glad you could join us today." The girl looked up, her eyes wary but curious. "I'm Zoe," she said after a moment. My school counselor told me about this group. I didn't want to come, but she said it might help." Melinda nodded understandingly. "It can be scary to take that first step," she said, "but you're very brave for being here. Do you want to tell me a little bit about why your counselor thought this group might help?" For a moment, Zoe was silent, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. Then, in a rush, the words came tumbling out. "It's my mom's boyfriend," she said, her voice trembling. "He hits her sometimes, and he says awful things to me. I try to tell my mom, but she doesn't believe me. She says I'm just jealous because I don't want her to be happy." Melinda felt a familiar mix of anger and sadness wash over her. It was a story she had heard too many times. Children caught in the crossfire of abusive relationships, their own pain overlooked or dismissed. But she also felt a surge of hope. Zoe was here. She was speaking out. That was the first crucial step. "I believe you, Zoe," Melinda said firmly. "And I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You deserve to feel safe in your own home." Tears spilled down Zoe's cheeks. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I'm scared all the time." Melinda reached out, gently taking Zoe's hand. "I know it's scary," she said, "but you're not alone anymore. We're going to help you and your mom. It won't be easy, but there is a way out. Do you think you could be brave for just a little bit longer?" Zoe nodded, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "I'll try," she said. Over the next few weeks, Melinda worked closely with Zoe and her school counselor. They developed a safety plan, connected Zoe with a therapist who specialized in helping teens from abusive homes, and began the delicate process of reaching out to Zoe's mother. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and moments of despair. But slowly, surely, progress was made. Zoe's mother finally agreed to attend a support group meeting, her eyes opening to the reality of her situation. And one rainy night, with Melinda and Janelle's help, they packed their bags and left, seeking refuge in a shelter where they could begin to rebuild their lives. As spring turned to summer, Melinda found herself busier than ever. The diner was thriving, with more and more people coming in not just for the food, but for the sense of community and safety it provided. Silent No More was growing too, expanding its services and reaching more people in need. One sunny afternoon, as Melinda was taking a rare break, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee, the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, her face breaking into a wide smile as she recognized the people entering. Isaiah and Layla burst into the diner, their faces alight with excitement. Behind them came Janelle, looking relaxed and happy in a way Melinda had never seen before. "Melinda," Isaiah called out, rushing to the counter. "Guess what? Mom got a job, a real job, in an office." Melinda came around the counter, sweeping the children into a hug. "That's wonderful news," she exclaimed, looking up at Janelle with pride. "Congratulations." Janelle blushed, her smile a mix of pride and lingering disbelief. "It's just an entry-level position," she said. "But it's a start, a chance to build a real future for us." As they settled into a booth, Layla tugging Melinda along to join them, Melinda felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This was what it was all about, not just rescuing people from bad situations, but helping them build new lives full of hope and possibility. But the work was far from over. As if to underscore that thought, Melinda's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, the young woman she had helped weeks ago. Made it to the shelter, the message read, "Scared but safe. Thank you for everything." Melinda showed the message to Janelle, who nodded in understanding. "Another life changed," she said softly. "Another family given a chance at a fresh start." As autumn approached, bringing with it a crispness to the air and a riot of color to the trees, Melinda found herself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past year. The Sunrise Diner had become more than just a place to grab a meal. It was a haven, a place where secrets could be shared and help could be found. One chilly October morning, as Melinda was opening up the diner, she noticed a familiar face peering in through the window. It was Zoe, the teenage girl she had met at the support group months ago. Melinda quickly unlocked the door, ushering her in from the cold. "Zoe, what are you doing here so early? Is everything okay?" Zoe nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Everything's great, actually. I wanted to show you something." She reached in her backpack and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. With trembling hands, she held it out to Melinda. "It's my college acceptance letter," she said, her voice a mix of pride and disbelief. "I got a scholarship and everything. I never dreamed this could happen for me." Melinda felt tears spring to her eyes as she pulled Zoe into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard for this." As they sat at the counter, sharing hot chocolate and talking about Zoe's plans for the future, Melinda marveled at the transformation in the young woman before her. Gone was the scared, withdrawn girl she had first met. In her place was a confident, hopeful young woman ready to take on the world. "You know," Zoe said softly, "I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for you. For what you did that day in the diner, and everything after. You showed me that it was possible to have a different kind of life." Melinda reached out, squeezing Zoe's hand. "You did the hard work, Zoe. You were brave enough to speak up, to ask for help. I just pointed you in the right direction." As Zoe left for school, promising to come back soon with her mom to celebrate properly, Melinda felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why she did what she did, not for recognition or praise, but for moments like this. Moments when she could see the tangible impact of a simple act of kindness, of being willing to notice and to act. The bell above the door chimed again, and Melinda looked up to see Rita, her manager, walking in. "You're here early," Rita commented, hanging up her coat. "Everything okay?" Melinda nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Everything's perfect," she said. "Just perfect." As the day wore on, Melinda found herself paying extra attention to every customer who came through the door. Not out of suspicion or fear, but with a sense of openness and compassion. Each person who sat at her counter or slid into a booth had a story, she knew. And while not all of them needed the kind of help she had offered to Janelle's family or to Zoe, they all deserved to be seen, to be acknowledged. During the afternoon lull, as Melinda was refilling salt shakers, the door opened and a tall, distinguished-looking woman walked in. She glanced around the diner before making her way to the counter. "Are you Melinda?" she asked, her voice warm but professional. Melinda nodded, setting down the salt shaker. "I am. How can I help you?" The woman smiled, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Wright. I'm a professor of social work at the State University. I've heard a lot about you and the work you've been doing with Silent No More." Melinda felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach as she shook Dr. Wright's hand. "It's nice to meet you," she said. "What brings you to our little diner?" Dr. Wright settled onto a stool, her eyes alight with interest. "I'm working on a research project," she explained, "studying grassroots movements in domestic violence prevention and intervention. Your organization has come up repeatedly in my research as a model of community-based support." For the next hour, as Melinda worked around the diner, Dr. Wright asked questions and took notes. She wanted to know everything. How Melinda had first recognized the signs of abuse in Janelle's family, how Silent No More had grown from a small support group to a multifaceted organization, what challenges they had faced along the way. "What you've accomplished here is remarkable," Dr. Wright said as she prepared to leave. "You've created a model that could be replicated in communities across the country. Have you ever considered expanding your reach?" Melinda blinked, surprised by the question. I hadn't really thought about it," she admitted. "We've been so focused on helping people here in our community." Dr. Wright nodded understandingly. "Of course. But think about it. The principles you've developed, the networks you've built, they could help so many more people if implemented on a larger scale." As Dr. Wright left, promising to stay in touch, Melinda found her mind whirling with possibilities. Expand their reach? Take Silent No More beyond the borders of their small town? The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. That evening, after closing up the diner, Melinda met with Janelle and a few other core members of Silent No More at the community center. As they discussed upcoming events and ongoing cases, Melinda couldn't shake the conversation with Dr. Wright. Finally, as the meeting was winding down, she cleared her throat. "I had an interesting visitor at the diner today," Melinda began, her voice tentative. She went on to explain about Dr. Wright and her suggestion about expanding their reach. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Janelle was the first to speak, her eyes shining with excitement. "Melinda, this could be huge," she said. "Think about how many more people we could help." Others chimed in, their voices a mix of enthusiasm and concern. They discussed the logistics, the challenges, the potential impact. As the conversation flowed around her, Melinda felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling she'd had that day in the diner when she'd first decided to help Janelle and her family. "I think we should do it," Melinda said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "We've learned so much, helped so many people. If we can share that knowledge, that experience with other communities, well, isn't that why we started this in the first place?" The decision was unanimous. Over the next few months, Melinda and the team worked tirelessly to develop a framework that could be shared with other communities. They created training materials, established partnerships with national organizations, and began reaching out to other towns and cities interested in implementing their model. As word spread, Melinda found herself traveling more, speaking at conferences and meeting with community leaders across the state. It was challenging, balancing her work at the diner with her growing responsibilities with Silent No More. But every time she saw a spark of recognition in someone's eyes, every time she heard about another life changed or saved because of their work, she knew it was worth it. One year after Dr. Wright's visit, Melinda stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., addressing a national conference on domestic violence prevention. As she looked out over the sea of faces, social workers, law enforcement officers, educators, and survivors, she felt a profound sense of awe and gratitude. "When I first noticed something was wrong that day in the diner," Melinda began, her voice strong and clear, "I never imagined where that one moment would lead. I was just a waitress doing my job, but I've learned that we all have the power to make a difference, to create ripples of change that can transform lives and communities." As she shared the story of Silent No More and the impact it had made, Melinda saw heads nodding, tears being wiped away, and determined looks spreading across faces in the audience. She knew that each person there would take what they learned back to their own communities, creating new ripples of awareness and action. After her speech, as Melinda was gathering her things, a young woman approached her. "Miss Thompson," the woman said hesitantly, I just wanted to thank you. I heard you speak at my college last year, and it gave me the courage to leave my abusive boyfriend. I'm safe now, and I'm training to become a counselor. I want to help others the way you helped me." Melinda felt tears prick at her eyes as she hugged the young woman. She thought, this is why we do what we do. As Melinda flew home the next day, her mind was already racing with new ideas, new ways to expand their reach and help more people. But as the plane descended and she saw the familiar landscape of her town spread out below her, she felt a tug of homesickness. For all the amazing experiences of the past year, for all the lives they'd touched across the country, Melinda's heart still belonged to the Sunrise Diner. It was where it had all begun, where she could still make a difference one cup of coffee, one conversation at a time. Walking into the diner the next morning, Melinda was greeted by cheers and applause. Rita had told everyone about her speech in D.C., and the regulars were bursting with pride. As Melinda tied on her apron and picked up her coffee pot, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged. Over the next few years, Silent No More continued to grow and evolve. They developed online training programs, created a national hotline, and worked with legislators to strengthen laws protecting victims of domestic violence. Melinda remained at the heart of it all, splitting her time between the diner and her work with the organization. But it was the small moments that meant the most to her. The quiet conversations over coffee, the notes of thanks slipped on her plates, the smiles of recognition from those she had helped. Each interaction was a reminder of the power of paying attention, of being willing to reach out and make a difference. 5 years to the day after that fateful morning when Janelle and her family had first walked into the diner, Melinda stood behind the counter, surveying her domain. The diner looked much the same worn booths, same slightly sticky menus. But the feeling in the air was different. There was a warmth, a sense of safety and community that went beyond good food and hot coffee. The bell above the door chimed, and Melinda looked up to see Janelle walking in, followed by Isaiah and Layla. But they weren't alone. Behind them came Sarah, Zoe, and a dozen others, people whose lives had been touched by Silent No More, people who had found the strength to build new lives free from abuse and fear. As the group settled into booths and around the counter, filling the diner with laughter and chatter, Melinda felt her heart swell with emotion. This, she realized, was her real legacy. Not the speeches or the national recognition, but this, a community of survivors and allies, supporting each other and reaching out to help others. Janelle caught her eye from across the diner, raising her coffee mug in a silent toast. Melinda smiled, raising her own mug in return. They had come so far from that terrifying day 5 years ago. There was still work to be done, still lives to be changed. But in this moment, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, Melinda felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. As she moved through the diner, refilling coffee cups and chatting with her guests, Melinda reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. It had started with a simple act of noticing, of caring enough to get involved. From that one moment, ripples of change had spread outward, touching lives far beyond the walls of the Sunrise Diner. Melinda knew that there would always be challenges ahead. Domestic violence wouldn't disappear overnight, and there would always be those in need of help and support. But she also knew that they had created something powerful, a network of vigilant eyes and helping hands, ready to notice, to act, to make a difference. As the afternoon wore on and the impromptu celebration showed no signs of slowing down, Melinda found herself standing by the diner's front window. She looked out at the street where, 5 years ago, she had watched Janelle and her children walk away to an uncertain future. Now, that same street was filled with people coming and going, each carrying with them the potential to create their own ripples of change. Melinda felt a tug on her apron and looked down to see Layla, now a confident teenager, smiling up at her. "Thank you," Layla said simply, wrapping her arms around Melinda in a tight hug. "For everything." As Melinda returned the hug, she felt a sense of completion wash over her. This was why she had acted that day, why she continued to pour her heart and soul into both the diner and Silent No More. It wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about moments like this, moments of connection, of healing, of hope. "No, thank you," Melinda whispered back. "For being brave, for speaking up, for showing others that change is possible." As they pulled apart, Melinda looked around the diner once more. She saw survivors sharing stories and offering support to newcomers. She saw volunteers discussing upcoming events and brainstorming new initiatives. She saw a community united in its commitment to breaking the cycle of violence and creating a safer world for all. And at the center of it all was the Sunrise Diner, a simple place that had become so much more. It was a beacon of hope, a safe haven, and a launching pad for change. It was proof that sometimes the most profound transformations begin in the most ordinary of places. And that's the powerful story of Melinda and Isaiah, a tale of bravery, compassion, and a family's journey from fear to freedom. What started as an unsettling dinner at a diner led to the uncovering of a heartbreaking reality hidden beneath the surface. Thanks to Melinda's quick thinking and courage, A family was rescued from unimaginable pain, and healing could finally begin. If this story of courage and resilience moved you, let us know in the comments below. We hope it serves as a reminder that sometimes a simple act of kindness can change someone's life forever. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.